For Reaper Metal Productions, I am Adam of Unbaptized Records, here to make a brand new video for you for this week. In today's video, I'm going over another list, one of my favorite bands of all time, Toxic Holocaust. I'm going to go through their albums and rank them from least favorite to most favorite. I just did this recently with Municipal Waste, so if you haven't seen that video, go check the link in the description. Watch this video, watch that video, let me know what your favorites are, your least favorites are. Without any further ado, I'll go through mine for Toxic Holocaust. So, in theory, they are probably my fifth favorite band of all time, at least metal bands. They kind of fluctuate a little bit, but for the most part, they have been in that ranking for a while. So, I definitely value all of their albums. But again, someone's got to be first, and someone's got to be last. So, for them, I would say my least favorite is probably similar to Municipal Waste, their newest one. So, Primal Future 2019. It's an album I picked up day one, like most of the rest of their albums. But honestly, I haven't given it too many re-listens. I think I've probably spun it 3 times. It's a good album, but the vocals on this seem a lot more, just a lot different than a lot of the other records. It feels like Joel's vocals have more echo to them. I didn't really care for them as much. They weren't as punchy. They weren't as heavy as some of the other ones. I mean, heavy for thrash, not heavy overall. But to some of the other albums, I just thought the vocals didn't really stand out. I didn't like them as much. It sounded a bit more like the War Ripper 7 inches that he's put out, which sounds good for those projects, but for Toxic Holocaust, not as much. So again, still a good album, definitely worth picking up if you're a fan of the band. But it was probably my least favorite, and I don't think it really has much competition. I think it's probably easily sitting at my least favorite. But I do like the vinyl color. It's clear with this pink splatter. So again, similar to Municipal Waste, the vinyls for all of these records tend to match the album art pretty well, and they all tend to be pretty different from one another. And I really enjoy that. I think it's really cool. Next, second from the bottom, and pretty much anything above the last one, I enjoy pretty much very close to equally. So it was kind of hard to pick an order, but it would be Conjuring Command. This is a great album, but it's probably the most different from all the other records. And even admittedly, Joel said that he was kind of going for a different sound for this, which is probably the only reason it's towards the bottom, is because I don't give it as many spins, although I probably should. You can even see here that the logo is different. It's still a great album. It just has a different vibe to it. It's a little bit darker, a little less thrashy, but definitely worth picking up. I think the album art's pretty cool. And once again, you can guess from what I've been saying so far in this video and the Municipal Waste video. But yes, this is also going to have a vinyl color that matches the cover, which again is cool. I think it definitely adds to it. And then one of their probably most well-known recent songs, "Bitch," is definitely a great song, and it's one of their most famous songs, and it happens to be on this record. But that is probably the one that stands out the most. Everything else sort of blends in, but it's definitely a good album. Again, they really don't have any bad albums. Definitely worth a listen. You have this clear, milky clear with white and black stripes. And this was a recent repress too, which is good because unfortunately this was kind of a harder record to find. So I'm glad that this came out as a repress. Next is their second album, Hell on Earth. This is a good but not necessarily great follow-up to their first album. I think it's a bit weaker. Definitely, I would say, deserves its position at the third from bottom, maybe even tied with Conjuring Command. Honestly, I could maybe even switch the two. Again, not a bad album, but after the more raw feel of the first album, this is a little bit of a downgrade. It's still good, and it still feels like a Toxic album, but just not as good as the first. I think it's just such a departure, especially the people who were fans from the beginning, fans from the demo eras up to the first album. This is probably their cutoff, which is kind of too bad because after that, I think it's some of his best work. But I definitely could see how after the first album, this is a bit of a downgrade, but I still think it's a good album. I definitely still recommend it. Again, every album by them has value. I like them all, but I could definitely easily see this staying towards the bottom of the list, which is fine because, again, they have plenty of good albums, so I'm not too worried. This is kind of a cool split between clear and yellow. probably the least one to match the color of the record. I maybe would have gone with a pink for this, but I don't have too many splits like that, so I think that is pretty cool. Now we're getting to close to the top of the list. We have Chemistry of Consciousness. Now, this is definitely not my favorite album. As you can tell, I have a few more ahead, but my favorite song by Toxic, and honestly my favorite metal song of all time, is Acid Fuzz. It's the first song I heard by them. I was pretty late to the game on Toxic. I only heard about them in 2016. Thanks to Jayhoff Films, Chris Thrasher was the one who introduced me to them by accident. He mentioned them in one of his first skits ever, where he was wearing a Toxic Holocaust hat, and he said it was his favorite band or one of his favorite bands. And luckily, through chat, I was actually able to tell him, and he responded over YouTube, which was really cool. And when I got to see Toxic for the first time, so kind of the fun story about this album, the Acid Fuzz song, and Toxic in general was I was in kind of a rough place with work and life, and I had just discovered the band, like I said, through YouTube, and I looked them up. Turns out they were playing down the street from me at this small little club, and I got to go. It's a couple days after I discovered them, and it was awesome. There was only maybe 20 people there. There's a couple local bands playing, and it looks like Joel was playing, with Toxic on his way through national tour US and I think parts of Canada, and he stopped in. And this wasn't even his first time playing at this venue, and it was great because there was only a few people there. Very small concert. It's a very small venue. Got to meet him, talk to him a little bit. He was there for the whole show, hanging out with people. If I had known more about him and the band, I definitely would have talked to him more. But when I had seen him later in Boston, a couple years later, I brought that place up, and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember playing there. That's cool," because he had been there a few times. And I think he records this place called Dexter's Lab, which is maybe about 30, 40 minutes away from that venue in Connecticut, so it's cool. So I guess he knows the place, and he's been there at least once before. So hopefully he'll go back Cherry Street in Wallingford, which would be awesome. But being able to see them there was probably one of the best concert experiences I've ever had. Being that up close and personal with a band that I had never heard of, that are as big as they are, and not knowing that they were as big as they were and still are at the time, only to find out later. So I'm really glad I was able to see them, and especially being able to see them the second time, talk to Joel, hang out with him a little bit. I posted the pictures on my Instagram, and I got a couple of things signed, some CDs, 7 inches and stuff. And he was as cool then as he was the first time I met him. So, as far as I could tell, Joel's probably one of the coolest people in the metal world, other than the dudes from Municipal Waste, all the guys from Exhumed, and a couple other bands. I haven't met a ton, but Joel is definitely one of the nicest people I've ever met. And my favorite song, and I told him my favorite metal song of all time is Acid Fuzz. So to own it on wax, to own it on CD, and to have been able to see it live is definitely one of my favorite concert experiences. So that's why that album ranks as high as it does. Now, this might be a surprise, but the second, not first, is Evil Never Dies for me. This is a great album. Honestly, 10 out of 10. I also own this on CD and tape. My CD was signed. I brought that with me. And the tape has a couple of, I believe they are Sodom covers. So if you can get your hands on that as well, it's awesome. This is a Tank Crimes repress. Thank you to Scotty of Tank Crimes for putting this out, because this is another one that was sort of rare, a little harder to find, not super expensive, but definitely needed a repress. And I'm so glad that they did. Tank Crimes does a lot of great stuff, and this is definitely something I needed in my collection. I can go through the list, but of course, you probably know 666 as their second or first most famous song. It's on here. It's great. Everything on here is great. War is Hell, Damned to Fire, Demise, Warfare, everything. This is a great album, 10 out of 10. Artwork, 10 out of 10. Everything. Vocals, music, and the radiation, yellow and black. And a little fun fact, for whatever reason, I had no idea, but the first two albums, Joel did it all himself, including programming the drums with a drum machine, and I did not know that. For whatever reason, my ears just were too stupid to pick up the fact that the first two albums were drum machines, which is really funny to me. So you definitely can't accuse me of being any sort of music elitist, because I couldn't even tell what a drum machine was. I mean, you play me Mortician, I know it's a drum machine, but I couldn't tell with these two albums. So just kind of a little fun fact there. And the number one favorite album is An Overdose of Death. between some of the songs on here, the album art, it's just fantastic. It's easily one of the best records I've ever listened to. Wild Dogs, Nuke the Cross, War is Hell, Gravelord, Feedback, Blood and Distortion. It's just amazing. There's nothing about this album I don't love, and I'm so glad this had gotten repressed by Relapse. And I'm also super grateful it came out in this really cool tricolor. This happens to be one of my favorite color combinations because this is like the New Orleans color combo, the gold, green, and purple. And it just happens to, of course, go perfectly with the album cover. Go figure. So not only is it my favorite record by them, but it's one of my favorite color combos, and it fits perfectly with the vibe and the color of the album art. So those are my top favorite records in order, from least to most favorite. Like I said in my Municipal Waste video, I also have the split that Municipal Waste did with Toxic Holocaust. I do not have a picture disc, but that would be a nice thing to add to the collection, especially to get it signed. And by Joel specifically, I have his War Ripper 7 inches side project he did. There's two of them as of now. Those are both hanging up on my wall, signed by him. I also have the split that he did with Midnight. I think it was to give money to tsunami victims in Japan. I have that signed by him as well. So maybe one day I'll meet Athanar and get him to sign that as well. But that's on my wall. I'm not taking it down. Let me know in the comments what are some of your favorites, least favorites, and I'll talk to you in the next video.